Have you ever been hurt because you thought you had a meaningful relationship with someone and you had a really good communication flowing between the two of you, but suddenly one person just decided to cut it all off? And it doesn't matter how hard you've tried, how many times you went after them, extended your hand and offer help, it just really didn't seem to work. And the situation got toxic and you got really upset. Hi, my name is Coach Ted, and I am a neurotransformational life coach and a founder of learningpretzel.com. And today I welcome you, a very dear friend of mine, Coach Meriam Baldwin, to a sixth episode of the Home of Growth series, where we are responding to a hot topic in our community, which is ghosting. Hello, Meriam. Say hello to everyone.
Hello, Ted. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is feeling well. My name is Meriam Baldwin. I am a coach, I'm a caregiver advocate, motivational speaker, and the author of Caregiver 2.0 From Burnout to Powerhouse. This is amazing, Ted. Ghosting. Many of us don't know what ghosting is, and I think I've experienced it quite sometimes. Many times I wasn't sure if it was ghosting, but people would cut off communication abruptly, and some came back, some didn't come back. So Ted, I was wondering, how does it work? How does it
Yeah.
work? When is it ghosting?
Yeah, and this is such a great question, Miriam. And I'm sure that a lot of our viewers and listeners will probably have this question also going through, because that's what happens, right? Like we hear a really great phrase or a really good term, and then we're trying to, translate it into our life. Like, okay, so which one of those situations are actually ghosting? Because it's not that easy for somebody who doesn't
Mm-hmm.
understand the full depth of it to analyze it. And I just want to welcome everybody who's tuning in, whether you're listening or watching. I just want to welcome all of you and say, pop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Make sure that you tell us what's landing for you and whether you would like to hear more, because this episode is a manifestation of our promise to you to keep this series a dialogue, because ghosting has heated up a lot of conversations in our community. We thought we just do a video about it to dive into this concept a little bit further. So make sure you reach out, make sure you raise your concerns, and keep engaging inside of the communities and whatever platform you choose to. So Miriam, coming back to your question, this is such an important thing, right? To be
Mm-hmm.
able to discern what is and what isn't really, a ghosting. Because I think that we all have a tendency that when we hear a term like ghosting, we tend to throw everything into the same bag.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
as soon as it hits some of the symptoms or some of the criterias, I think that it just, gets to be thrown into a one bag. And as often as our intuition kind of like throws a really good call on that, well, we might not always be right. So for those of you who don't know what ghosting is a form of a behavior where very suddenly a person chooses to cut all form of a communication and keeps avoiding being in contact with you at all. Now, this is never about you. It's always about the other person. But what they do is, for whatever reason or the whatever trigger, it's a form of a response. And very often it's a protective response to cut all form of a communication with you, because they cannot find themselves inside of the communication. Now, very often people mistaken ghosting for somebody just avoiding to have a conversation about something,
Uh-huh.
right? So the difference is that if somebody, so let me put it into a context of an example, right? If you are seeing me and you're excited, or if you are under stress in a work environment and you need to talk to me about something that's really important, you might approach me and want to dive into a subject that's really important to you and you want to find out more about. And because we are in a social context, and I know that there's no way for me to answer this conversation, engage this conversation, and answer your question without speaking about either a sensitive information or something that cannot, or I just don't want to expose in that social context, perhaps other people or somebody could overhear us, I might be avoiding a conversation. And I might be avoiding it until the circumstances and the environment is favorable for us to dive into this concept. However, that is not the same, because that is simply just not engaging in a conversation in a moment. Now, this can be a valid reason, it can be silly, it can be whatever you make it mean, but that is not the same as ghosting. Ghosting is if we are in touch. For example, the two of us, we're doing this series. We're talking a couple of times a week. We record this episode once a week, and from one week to another, we are constantly in touch. We discuss it with our community. We do a lot of different things. So there's a communication back and forth.
Yeah.
And if very sudden, one of us just chooses to stop communication, which means I'm neither going to reach out to you, nor am I going to answer to your attempts to connect with me. And just like a ghost, right? I'm nowhere to be seen. I'm nowhere to be heard of. I'm avoiding being in the same environment and all of that. This is where I have turned it into ghosting. So the difference really is that sometimes we might be avoidant to confront somebody in a particular moment. You might not want to be talking to somebody. You're angry at someone when they're upset. So you know you're not in a good emotional state. So you're going to be avoiding getting in contact with them. But that is not the same as ghosting, because ghosting is a full hard stop. You vanish from the ground. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense, because I thought, I'm so happy you explained this, Ted, because like I mentioned before, I had a couple of experiences. And now that you have explained the difference, it's more clear for me what ghosting is. And I think it happens quite a lot.
Absolutely.
Ghosting.
And to see, and Miriam, one of the important things to understand as well is that the reasons for actual ghosting can be multiple. Like usually it stems from a few different things, right? So it starts when there's some form of a disconnection, right? But it can either happen because somebody has an avoidant style, right? So if they in general, have a habit of avoiding anything that's confrontational or anything that dives into a very vulnerable parts of them, right? Because I do want to make sure that as we speak about it, I want to make sure that there are two things that I want to highlight. The intention with this episode is not to give you an answer whether you should leave someone or not, because that's completely your answer. We are more than happy to explore those subjects so you can make an informed choices for your benefit.
Yeah.
And the second thing is also, when we speak particularly in ghosting, we don't want to make anybody the villain, because I do not deny that those people created a situation that hurt you. I don't deny that. And I very much empathize with that, because I've been there. I know how hard it is, and I know how difficult it is. And I'm sure, Meriam, you know that as well. When we want to help someone, and especially when we know it doesn't have to be like that, when we know it can be resolved so easily, we just want to go there and be Rescue 911 and help them and educate them and solve it all, and not for them not to have all of those problems, and for us to live happily ever after, whether we're in a relationship or friendship or family, right? And as beautiful as this intention and sentiment is, it's yours.
Yeah.
That person needs to go through it by themselves. So the reason why I want to speak to the reasons of it is because, first of all, it can be an avoidance style that's just how somebody is responding. And here's the hard truth. And I know that shakes people sometimes. When somebody has an avoidance style, they will avoid even hearing the suggestion.
Yeah.
So until something happens in their life that makes them want to change that, nothing you will do will change them. Nothing. They need to want that themselves. And sometimes it might also, ghosting can be a cause of people just being afraid, people of feeling insecure, of not knowing how to find themselves inside of this situation. If you're in a relationship, if you're getting too close to somebody, and if you're addressing a very intimate questions, well, that can terrify a lot of people. But I have a question, Meriam, because I think that it's always really good to put that into a perspective, right? Have you ever ghosted anyone?
Yes.
Mm.
Years ago, I ghosted.
Me too.
And yeah, I'm honest about this. Yes, I
Absolutely.
ghosted. You know, Ted, and I really had to take a good look at myself. Self-reflection.
Sure.
Why am I feeling like this? Why, those questions I needed to ask myself. What am I feeling, and why am I feeling like this?
Yeah, but the question that I want to ask you, because I love the fact that we are able to ask each other those questions and come forward with and call ourselves forward with both sides of it, because we really strive to represent to you that, although both of us do work as coaches, we are just humans like everyone else. And we have gone through a lot of those things that many of our clients struggle. We just learned how to navigate it. We've mastered it to the point where we are able to help others navigate through it. But by no means we want to create this, create this illusion that we have never experienced, that we just know everything about it. Because I still sometimes experience ghosting, and I still sometimes find it really difficult. And what I really want to ask you, because you said that that you did ghost it, and you had to take a very good look at yourself, right? Now, I did too, but here's the thing. When you were ghosting a person, now, for me, with hand on my heart, I don't think that I have heard anything that they were trying to say to me in that moment. Right?
I didn't want to hear anything.
Boom, bingo. I wanted to take a look at myself later on, but when it worked for me, and I know that that works for many, many people, I took a good look at myself when I was really hurt. And when I went back to these folks, and they didn't want me back because they've moved on.
Yep.
That's the painful moment. And quite honestly, I don't think it always has to come to that point. However, if you are avoiding something, you will avoid even hearing anything that's remotely connected to it. So sometimes it's a scenario where you just have to fall, you just have to hit the wall, you have to touch the hot pot to learn that it burns, because otherwise you will find a justifiable excuse for just about anything, right? But I want to bring this, I want to reveal a session, sorry, not session, but a side of me that I hope is going to bring a little bit more of compassion. And I invite you, Meriam, to share that as well. For me, when I was ghosting people, and I did that quite prominently for a period of my life in particular, is because the relationships with these people and the conversation that we were having were getting so deep and so intimate that I was getting absolutely petrified. And I know that today, looking back, I didn't have a clue back then. So if you're listening to us, if you're watching this, I want you to really keep that in mind, that we speak from a perspective of a retrospection, from today looking backwards. Which is not something that we're aware of at the time. But back then, I was absolutely petrified of being exposed. I was petrified of being exposed as a person that was hurting. I was petrified to be exposed as a person that was avoiding and that didn't have as many friends as people thought that I did. Um, I was petrified of really being scared of being exposed as an undereducated person, that I didn't have all of those degrees back then, that I didn't have all of those diplomas. And I was absolutely petrified
Yeah.
of what will happen if people find out how really screwed up I am on the inside.
Yeah. So relatable. Most of the things you just mentioned, Ted, I had the same. I had the same, and today I can ask myself the question, why did I think like that then? It's so, it can be, how do you say this? It can be, I wouldn't say dangerous, that, but it led to ghosting.
Absolutely. And you know what? Like, I do understand that when we get into that place in our life, it's usually because, first of all, we're absolutely petrified of being exposed about something. And what we are petrified, about being exposed is going to be different for everybody. But one of the things that I find is as well that when you cannot channel a positive
Mm,
energy and have a proper flow of energy and a good emotions about yourself, it's because you're really disconnected internally. All of your parts are all over the place. And I know that this can be hard to hear for some of the people. And I hope you hear the hopeful message we have shared with you in here through our manifestation, that when you really welcome yourself and you start doing the work upon yourself, dive into the personal development, move through it holistically,
mhm.
you can absolutely join all of the parts of you to become whole, so you can actually live, a much more fulfilling and a joyful life. That if you are in a place where things are just, they just really like, I don't want to say that, but I think that you will all be able to relate when I say it's like when it's all fucked up, like when it just feels like, and excuse my language, but like when it's really, really just not a great place to be, where you don't feel good about yourself, when there's so many different things that is happening. And when you're on both sides of the ghosting, right, like when you're trying to avoid something, when you're afraid of being exposed, right, or whether you are just simply in a conflict with something and you chase after that person going like, I'm gonna fix you, I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna do that. Because what happens is that when we start chasing a person that actually has ghosted us, what happens is that then we actually turn into an obsessive person very
Yeah.
often, that keep chasing because we have this goal, we know it's possible, it's just we're like, you know it's this never ending chase, and we end up actually hurting ourselves. And the interesting part about it is that when a person ghosts us is because they want to avoid something. What they want to avoid is theirs.
Yeah, it's not
So
ours.
when they want to avoid that, the more you go after them, the more you trigger that. So therefore, the more you go after them, the more they will be trying to go away. Miriam, what were some of the things, because I do want to dive into that further, but I just want to ask you, what were some of the things, for example, that you have found, to know what, before we go there, Do you remember one of the most pronounced ghosting experience in your life? Like anything that you can particularly easily connect it to? I'd like to do a little guided exercise there.
Oh, yes. There are actually two experiences.
Okay, so
Two.
for
But I'll
everyone,
pick one. I'll pick one.
so for everybody who's watching and everybody who's listening, whether it's a video or podcast, I invite you just to really create a couple of minutes of a space for yourself where you can focus. If you have headphones, it's great. You can pause this and get your headphones and then come back. But in the meantime, I really want you to think about just one situation where you were ghosted, right? And you can write those answers, you can answer them to yourself, you can say them out loud if you want, but just for the purpose of this presentation, Meriam, and this exercise, I just want you to keep those answers to yourself until I find that, okay? Until I ask you to come forward. Is that okay?
Okay, let's do this.
Great. So when you're recalling the situation where somebody just caught all forms of communication without any warning, without any justification, just very abruptly cut all form of communication and disappeared from the planet Earth, nowhere to be seen around you, right? So can you look back and see if there was any form of a conflict in there?
There was a sort of conflict.
Okay, so what I want to do for everybody who's listening is when I speak about conflict, I want you to think about it. Was there a conflict of an interest that people had a very different desires? Or maybe it was a conflict of emotional depth or intimacy, right? Like maybe you wanted to be more intimate and somebody wasn't, or the other way around. Or maybe there was a commitment and a sense of responsibility, that there was a conflict that you could discern that somebody wasn't willing to pick up the responsibility where you needed somebody to pick up the responsibility, whatever conflict there was, right? And then when you think about that, what do you think was the point that really inflamed it in what you did? So was there something that you did or didn't do that inflamed the situation, that you've noticed that after that a person started avoiding or cutting down the contact? Can you remember anything like that in your case?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah.
And for those of you who aren't able to place the finger on it, I can tell you this. This is a very difficult journey to go through, because you will never fully know what tipped off the person that ghosted you. You cannot fully understand what underlines all of the wiring for so many people without really asking them. And here's the surprising thing. A lot of people, if you ask them, they wouldn't even know. So if we move with this exercise, what was your first thought when you recognize that a person is avoiding you and is cutting off the communication?
My first thought was, why are they cutting off the communication? Why? What did I do? Or what did I didn't do?
Right. And this is really important. What you said is so important. I don't think that we could schedule that any better, really, for the purpose of this presentation. When somebody does that and we try to understand it, so many times, I'm not saying everyone, but so many of us are going to ask ourselves the question, why? Which if you have heard me, what I said just a minute ago is very often the person that doesn't understand why they did it. So we are trying to figure it out. We are trying to be Dr. Seuss and 911 rescue for everyone and figure it all out, even though they don't. And another thing is that, what have I done? And you see, and it's a dangerous, and this is where that situation can be very harmful. And I really want to speak to that, because number one, when we ask ourselves this question, our intention is really pure. We want to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves, right? So you want to really check yourself, like, have I done something wrong? And this is self-reflection, which is really, really good. But what have you done wrong is an assumption as well that it's your fault.
Yeah.
So reflecting back on yourself is really important. And especially if you are, becoming a person that's awoken and, and grows and really wants to be conscious and show up to your life in a certain way, it's incredibly important that you do that.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, taking the responsibility for someone else's inability to respond differently to a conflict, it's not your responsibility. And I know that this is really difficult to break it down, but when a person ghosts you, they make a choice.
Yeah.
And here's what you need to really, really hear and write it down for yourself and read it over and over and over again. When a person ghosts you, it looks like they're choosing not to do something. Not to do something is also a choice. And in that case, they are more concerned with protection of themselves than the hurt that will impose on you.
Yep. Boom.
Right? So when you keep chasing them, keep in mind that very often that just inflicts the rejection. We very often want to keep going after them because we want to establish connection. We don't understand why it happened, because we would have never done anything like that. But the only thing that we can really do is just to try to communicate. And this is the biggest point. When we are chasing a person to establish a connection, to establish intimacy with them, to establish this relationship again, and just check in, like, hey, what's up with you? I'm concerned about you. Are we still good? Because that's the initial, underlying message underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
And that person still does not respond. We interpret their reactions as our fault.
Yeah.
Because if we haven't done something wrong, they wouldn't have had a reason to do that. But that's our perception, you see. That's the way we look at it.
Yeah.
We would have acted that way. They have a completely different mindset in that situation. So what I really need you to be conscious of is that when somebody's ghosting you, the only thing you can do is you can just communicate to them. Meriam, have you tried communicating with a person that was ghosting you?
Many times.
And what was the response?
No response.
Exactly. And this is the difference. If somebody is having an issue that they are avoiding a contact for a little bit, a form of communication will usually be like a bait to a fish. If you just send a message, or if you reach out to that person, they'll reply to you, and it might not necessarily be, very elaborative about what's happening, but they will keep in touch with you. When a person ghosts you, they completely cut any form of a communication. And the only piece of advice I can give you in that department is, if somebody keeps ghosting you after you've tried communicating with them, after you've tried being supportive of them, after you've tried to explain yourself to them, whatever form of a communication you did, respect the dead and move on.
Yep.
because the only thing that can happen if you don't is that you will only hurt yourself.
This is so true.
You will only hurt yourself.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, they are on a journey they need to go through, and that's their journey to go through. Your responsibility is to, your primary responsibility in life is to look after yourself. We just sometimes get really stuck with this whole idea of really wanting to fix other people. But I am telling you, the only thing that you can do is to look after yourself, because that's your primary responsibility, and everything else is extra. You can inspire people, you can really try to communicate, you can teach them and all of that, but you will never do that forcefully. That person always has to be willing to do that. Yeah. Meriam, when you think about communication, because I would love us to, bring that into one of our following episodes, and I know that we've discussed that we will be talking about, that we will be talking about all different forms of communication and clear communication. What would you say is your piece of advice to help people? Because, it's easy to say respect the dead and move on, right? But we know moving on in those situations is not as easy as it sounds, right?
It can hurt a lot.
What was it that helped you, that you would share with our listeners, for example, that when somebody is ghosting them, like what thoughts were you helping yourself with? Like what was it that you did that helped you with ghosting?
Well, first of all, it was hard to let it go, Ted. I'm gonna be honest about this. And what helped me was asking myself the question, no, not asking, telling myself that I did the best I could have done. Meriam, you did the best you could, okay?
Yeah.
And that helped me a lot. I forgave myself for trying, maybe trying too hard. And just like you mentioned before, just stop trying to get in touch with that person. Does it make sense? I forgave myself for trying too much.
Absolutely. Because the thing is that, it takes two to tango, right? Like communication takes two, right? And as we said earlier, right, like we just want to be a rescue 911, and we want to go after them, and we want to, because I think that for me, going after people that have ghosted me, there were two things that were really painful. One of them, I wanted to go after them. Gosh, feels strange even saying that, but I wanted to go after them to verify that they avoid me. And I know that for me, it was verifying my own worthiness. I know that was underneath it. So I would keep going after the people who were ghosting me, because every time they ghosted me, I got to prove that I wasn't worthy. You see, it's your fault. So I was very abusive towards myself with, with what the people were doing. They were choosing, as we said, right, to just avoid any form of a communication. I was like, you see, and you think, and all those sorts of things. And I was really, really abusive. So for me, the relationship with, ghosting, like with being ghosted, was a little bit more complex, and I really needed to work through that actually with a coach, because it was just too complex for me. I've tried the small little things, and guys, if you know that that's you, we invite you to reach out, because sometimes it really, all it takes is just that help from outside to put it into a perspective and help us sort it out. But the one thing that have really helped me to deal with being ghosted, really, and it's funny because it started in the smallest thing, just like yourself. I reflected and I checked, have I done anything wrong to upset that person, right? So
Mhm.
that was my go-to reflection. But after that, the conversation that I had to have with myself was the key pivotal point, because after checking, have I done anything wrong? You said that, right? Like forgive yourself for, for anything that has happened there. Forgiveness is such a huge concept that I would love to discuss in one of the episodes. But inside of the conversation when I was being ghosted was that this is not about you,
Mhm.
that this is not about you. And it was really uncomfortable when I said that, because it disagreed with every single fiber of my body. My body was just really going for it. What do you mean it's not about me? Of course it's about me, and all of that. And it was only when I realized and connected to this incredible pull, this incredible draw towards making it about me, this is when I realized that that's where the root of the problem for me was. Because
Amazing. And
when
you know
i
what?
when I got into the place where I was saying that this is not about me, and then my body was like, what do you mean it's not about me? Look, you're
Mm-hmm.
so unworthy,
Mm-hmm.
you're this, you're that, right? So suddenly all of this negative chatter, all of the advocates of the devil came up and started roaring at that party. They all started like, oh yeah, look. And I was like, okay, so this is the activation thing here.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's when I realized that for me, the challenge with the ghosting was way, way deeper. Um,
And it can
Miriam,
be so. I would like to add something that
sure.
it's so exhausting when you keep going after that person. And when I realized that it wasn't doing my health any good, that was also a moment for me to self reflect again. I did a self reflection a couple of times.
Yeah.
It wasn't good for my health.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that the biggest thing that I would like to just say towards the end of it, to leave you with this idea and this thought really to embark on and explore, is really to remember that what other people do, you have no control over, and they do what they need to do. And the most important thing is that inside of that interaction and your own experience of it, you are primarily responsible for yourself. And it is not about you when they do that. It really isn't. And to look at it with compassion, that not everybody is in the place where you are, and not everybody has the capacity to understand what you understand. And that the same way as you were on a journey once and you continue to be, they are on their journeys as well. So
Yeah.
if you are the gladiator that keeps coming forward, calling yourself forward and taking action and making intentional choices to dive into learning more and finding out more, I celebrate you with my entire heart. Because it's people like you that really break a lot of the cycles and heal the world. But just remember that hurt people, and sometimes it takes a real punch and falling on the rock bottom and connecting to the roots and being rejected, and sometimes losing what we really, really, really care about.
Yeah.
Fully light up a desire to change.
Love it.
Miriam, thank you so much for another great episode. I
I
love
love it.
I love being in this community. And guys, once again, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for your time. And do make sure that you keep connecting with us, reaching out. We love hearing your comments, your messages, your emails, whichever way you feel comfortable with reaching out to us. Just know that you are home and the door is always open for you. Thank you so
Thank
much, everyone. Take care.
thank you. Bye
Bye bye.
bye.